Welcome back to First Mover. Nigeria's government recently approved a national blockchain policy as part of the country's effort to transition to a digital economy. Joining us now to discuss is Nestcoin CEO and co-founder Yele Bademosi. Good morning, Yele.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. Let's get right into it. This approval comes on the heels of a cash crisis in Nigeria. Give us an update on what's going on in Nigeria. Any updates on the cash crisis? How are Nigerians receiving the CBDC?
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of months. We're just coming off the back of a cash crunch in February. And, before the elections began, some of the sort of news in and around the fact that the old notes were going to go out of circulation were kind of rescinded. And so things have kind of calmed down a little bit. Interestingly, a couple of days ago, we actually had a report from the IMF about the latest on the CBDC. Unfortunately, only about 98.5% of all the created e-wallets for the e-Naira have actually have not done any transactions till date. The central bank mentioned that this is probably due to the fact that the banks have not been as supportive because they don't want customers to move into the e-wallets and sort of stay in their stay as bank customers. We think that, especially with the new presidential candidates coming in, we would see more policies that maybe encourage the fintech companies and even some of the crypto players to be the ones sort of championing the e-Naira. So we're pretty excited about what might happen over the next couple of months, and also there's been a lot of progressive and more positively higher sentiments or positive sentiments from some of the policies that we're seeing from the government as well. Although the restrictions on crypto exchanges having access to bank accounts have not been lifted yet, but some of the conversations happening with policymakers and statements by the incoming or by the new presidential government, bodes very strongly for the future of crypto in Africa's most populous country, Nigeria.
So I want to dig in a little bit more to this whole CBDC thing, because outside of China, Nigeria is one of the most famous CBDC experiments. So the fact that it's not going well is actually really interesting, just for the rest of the world. So you said that there's one central bank government narrative kind of about the banks, but what do you think is the story? I mean, do you think that's true, or do you think there are other reasons why this just hasn't taken off? I mean, it seems like in some cases maybe people just don't really have an incentive to use this. But I'm just curious what you think is the story here, like why it's not, why nobody's using it.
Yeah, I think that's my perspective is probably limited. But what I would say is it's about incentives and also who is sort of driving these initiatives. A lot of the growth of the fintech industry within the Africa landscape has not really been driven by banks, right? So a lot of the innovation has actually come from financial technology companies, from like the telcos, who are more incentivized to think about ways to bring this innovative technology to drive financial access and inclusion. So we think that a big part of it is the current drivers for this technology has been the banks as opposed to the more innovative players. Maybe what we might see is there might be banks who don't have the same level of market share and are willing to open up the platform to allow fintechs build on top of them and some of the crypto companies or Web3 companies, and then we might see a little bit more adoption and innovation. But for the average Nigerian who has money in their bank account and is used to doing bank transfers, this might not be uniquely different from what they're used to today already. So we think that use cases around distribution of cash and capital directly to the end users, access to credit, are some of the applications of the e-Naira that would then drive that kind of adoption. So I'm excited about the potential of collaboration with like the government and some of the digitally native on-chain financial companies that are beginning to build in the space, including ourselves.
So yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it's such an interesting thing because in the US, everybody's arguing already about CBDCs and trying to ban them, and there's so little data about how they actually work. So this is a really interesting case study. So I guess one question now, this might not be that relevant because, as you said, nobody's really using it. But one of the big questions about CBDCs is if it will kind of introduce more people to the concept of digital assets, thus introducing more people to Bitcoin, even though it's totally different, or if it will somehow kind of replace them, right? And I guess my question for you is, and maybe again, it's irrelevant because nobody's using the CBDC, but what has been the impact of this CBDC on just kind of general crypto use in Nigeria? Do you feel like it has, as some proponents will say, gotten people more exposed to digital assets or more curious about digital assets, or just no, or the opposite, or nothing at all?
Right now, there is not that much sort of adoption, between the retail or sort of, banking sector at all. So I don't think we've seen the kind of impact one will have expected when it comes to the, more awareness or adoption. I mean, one thing to note is that digital assets in African countries such as Nigeria are very popular, right? So from an awareness perspective, if you spoke to, 100 random people on the street, 50% of them will have heard about Bitcoin or some digital assets in some way, shape, or form. Not everybody might have a positive experience. Unfortunately, people are still exposed to scams, primarily because a lot of digital asset activity in Africa is driven in peer-to-peer channels. But the awareness level is already really high. Right. The main thing is just how do we go from the speculative narrative that, in my opinion, has come from trading crypto assets and was one of the initial use cases to, a future that is more focused on on-chain financial services, which is building financial services, creating financial access for the people that need it the most. It's not quite the same narrative as banking the unbanked, but the idea is that your geographical location should not determine the quality of financial services that you can have access to.
You mentioned the tension between the banks and the government when it comes to the CBDC. Some data that came out just a few months ago pointed to infrastructure issues and the fact that the Nigerian culture is really kind of centered around cash. Given all of the things that you've brought up during this interview and this data, do you think that the CBDC will be successful in Nigeria?
Yes, I think short term, I might not be as bullish, but long term, I remain bullish. Nigeria has a history of innovation when it comes to financial technology and services. I think a lot of people outside of the continent do not realize sort of the amount of innovation that we've seen, because we're literally building financial services for 200 million people from the ground up. However, the things that need to change are around policy, and then the companies, individuals, enterprises that are then championing this. If you think about kind of like the App Store, for instance, right? The developers that were building on the App Store were not necessarily Microsoft app developers, right? It was a new crop of incentivized people that saw this as a new platform and wanted to create more use cases and applications for the iPhone. So we think that with the e-Naira, as opposed to it being something that is primarily driven by the banks, we think it should be driven by more young, innovative, incentivized and driven young financial technology and startup companies.
All right. On that topic, that was a great transition to talk about your company, Nestcoin, who lost a significant amount of its $6.45 million raise during the FTX collapse. Right before this interview, you said, this is one of the first times that you can breathe and see a future for the company. Tell us about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a, very challenging couple of months, but I would say the last 2 or 3 months have been definitely a lot more positive. The FTX sort of fallout was a deeply unfortunate one, and it affected not just us, but hundreds of thousands of retail users who were probably first time in the crypto space, and that has definitely shaken confidence about the role of exchanges and the future of crypto on the continent and beyond. At the time for us, it was very important that we communicated openly and transparently with our community, our investors, and it was encouraging to see the level of support that we got from the ecosystem. And we had to make some very difficult decisions in terms of like our team. And then, we were able to really focus on what we felt was like our renewed mission and purpose as a company. For me, the big idea here was that we don't want any individual or business to ever be in the same position that we've been in. I actually think that traditional finance is a lot better than centralized crypto. But people have gone towards like centralized platforms primarily because there is no, it's really difficult to use non-custodial products and services. I think a lot about like Elon Musk and Tesla in terms of people didn't start using Tesla because they wanted to do the morally right thing for the planet. People chose Tesla because it was just a better car. It was a better car. And for on-chain and non-custodial products to become mainstream, we have to build things that are easy for people to use. And that's been like our renewed focus at Nestcoin. We recently launched a wallet called Onboard that makes it super easy to hold your assets in a completely non-custodial manner whilst making or maintaining sort of like a user experience that mirrors a traditional kind of financial application or product. And it's been quite exciting to see the traction that we've gotten in the last couple of months, doing tens of millions in transaction volumes, and excited to see what the future holds for us.
Yele, just quickly, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the use in Nigeria was speculative. That's true, obviously, in many parts of the world. But I'm just curious, have you observed any real use cases for crypto in Nigeria? Because people might not know about.
Yeah, I would actually say, so when I said speculative, I meant like crypto as a whole. I would actually posit that in Nigeria and a lot of African countries, we're seeing people use crypto for real world use cases, not limited to wanting to hold your wealth in sort of less volatile government or fiat currencies across the continent, or using it as a medium of exchange to convert local currency into USD. We have businesses and individuals primarily moving a lot of capital through stable coins, both from Africa to Europe, or to Africa to Asia, and Africa to the US. So those two use cases, in terms of, I'll probably even say like from a just money movement perspective, stable coins has definitely been, it's definitely found sort of product market fit, and is a huge use case right now.
Any stablecoin in particular, or is it very Tether dominated, or are there other stablecoins that are used widely?
Yeah, so I would say USDT is definitely the largest. Something that most people don't know globally is actually how popular Tron is in the market, in terms of like the Tron chain. And that's just because before the rise of L2 solutions like Optimism and Arbitrum, it was very difficult to use Ethereum, right? Like people are not going to spend $6 to $12 to move $1, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so when you had low cost chains like Tron, or the BNB Smart Chain, you saw kind of more adoption in that phase. But something that I'm really excited about is to see kind of different layer 2s or low cost chains sort of pop up, and we're seeing increased adoption in USDC, BUSD, and the likes.
Yele, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I guess this afternoon for you. That was Yele Bademosi, CEO and co-founder of Nestcoin.